Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be going way beyond the typical civil rights movement timeline. Like you always see those basic timelines and stuff.
Right.
But you've shared some really cool research with us, like a whole guide that really focuses on the causes and consequences of the movement. And
Yeah.
I'm really excited to kind of dig into it.
Yeah, it's really a journey worth taking. I think a lot of people are familiar with like the major events.
Yeah.
The big names and all that.
Sure.
But I think understanding the roots of those events and the kind of ripple effects that they created is crucial for really understanding like the significance of the movement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start with the setup, right? So we know slavery was abolished in 1865, but the guide kind of suggests that true equality was still like a distant dream at that point. And it mentions, some early efforts for equality, but why did the real push for civil rights kind of take hold, decades later in the 1950s and 60s? Like what were the factors that kind of lit the fuse at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is fascinating to think about because you have these early efforts like, the formation of the NAACP and things like that. They really laid the groundwork.
Right.
But to imagine like a society that was so entrenched in inequality that it took decades for those efforts to really gain momentum. One of the most glaring issues was the pervasiveness of this separate but equal doctrine that was enforced by these Jim Crow laws.
Right. The guide mentions separate but equal, and I remember learning about it in school.
Yeah.
But frankly, it always just felt like this really flimsy justification for just blatant discrimination. Like, how did that concept actually play out in daily life?
I mean, think about it like this. Like, imagine walking down the street and
Yeah.
being barred from using the same water fountain or restroom as someone else
Right.
solely because of your skin color.
Wow.
Or being relegated to the back of the bus, denied access to, quality education and healthcare.
Yeah.
Or even facing hostility when you're just trying to register to vote.
It's almost like unfathomable to think that such blatant segregation was just a reality not that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, and it went beyond just the physical separation, right?
Yeah.
Like this system was designed to create a hierarchy to reinforce this idea that African Americans were inherently inferior.
Right.
And the psychological impact of that is profound.
It's truly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And it kind of begs the question, how did people even begin to challenge such a deeply ingrained system? Like, where did they find the strength to push back against like such overwhelming odds?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. I mean, the guide kind of delves into the specific factors that fueled the movement. And it's not just about the injustices themselves, but it's about the seeds of resistance that were planted and nurtured over time.
Okay, so let's dive into those seeds. Like, what were those specific factors that really ignited the movement in the 1950s and 60s? I'm especially curious about like the role of Jim Crow laws. The guide uses that example of separate water fountains.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it went far beyond that.
Oh, you are absolutely right. I mean, these laws were insidious, right? Like they dictated nearly every aspect of life.
Wow.
For African Americans in the South, I mean, we're talking about separate schools, hospitals, even cemeteries.
Wow.
And when it came to voting, I mean, things got even more complex, right?
Right.
The guide mentions poll taxes and literacy tests as prime examples of voter suppression tactics.
Yeah, it's infuriating how they were specifically designed to just keep Black people from exercising their right to vote.
Right.
Like, were these laws ever challenged in court?
Absolutely. I mean, there were numerous legal battles, and that's where we see these early civil rights organizations like the NAACP really playing a crucial role.
Okay.
They laid the groundwork for landmark Supreme Court cases like Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, which declared segregated schools unconstitutional.
That must have been like a huge turning point.
Yeah.
A crack in the foundation of segregation.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a monumental victory.
Yeah.
But it also triggered fierce resistance,
Right.
highlighting another key factor that fueled the movement, which was this constant threat of violence.
This is where things get even heavier, right?
Yeah.
The guide mentions violence as a major motivator, and it's just hard to fathom the courage it must have taken to fight for justice while facing such danger.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine the bravery it took to simply walk to school,
Right.
ride a bus,
Yeah.
or attempt to register to vote,
Yeah.
knowing that you could face harassment, brutality,
Right.
or even death. I mean, the guide doesn't doesn't shy away from the grim realities of this era.
Yeah, it makes you wonder like what it must felt like to live under that constant fear.
Yeah.
How did African Americans find the strength to organize and fight for change in such a hostile environment?
That's where we see the power of community, faith,
Yeah.
and just unwavering determination, right? I mean, this wasn't just a movement of leaders. This was a movement of everyday people, families,
Oh.
churches, community organizations coming together
Right.
to demand justice and equality.
That's such a crucial point. It wasn't just about a few iconic figures. It was
Well,
about like a collective will for change, but
yeah.
knowing how deep-seated segregation was and the violence that often met peaceful protests.
Yeah.
I'm eager to understand how the movement gained traction and achieved like such significant victories.
Yeah. And that's exactly where we'll pick up next. We'll
Yeah.
explore the key events that shaped the movement, from boycotts to marches to acts of individual courage that really sparked nationwide change.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll dive into all of that.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've laid the groundwork, kind of understanding those deep-rooted causes of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Now let's actually dive into like the events themselves.
Okay.
The guide highlights so many pivotal moments.
Right.
But where do we even begin?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. There's a whole cascade of events, each
Yeah.
kind of building on the last. But, if we're talking about like a turning point,
Yeah.
the Montgomery bus boycott's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, the story of Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat.
Right.
I think most people know like the basics of that story,
Yeah.
but the guide mentions that it lasted over a year, which is incredible.
It's amazing.
Like, what can you tell us about the boycott's impact beyond just the desegregation of buses?
Well, it's a fantastic example of how seemingly small acts of defiance can spark, widespread change.
Right,
The boycott really crippled the city's bus system,
right.
hitting them economically.
Yeah.
And it also just forced the issue of segregation into the national spotlight,
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't just about Rosa Parks. It was an entire community coming together to say, like, enough is enough.
Right.
Yeah.
And the guide emphasizes that the boycott really thrust Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into a leadership role.
Absolutely.
Like, what was it about his approach that resonated so powerfully with people?
I think his message of nonviolent resistance, which was rooted in his deep faith
Right.
and belief in the inherent dignity of all people, really, really resonated.
Yeah.
And he just had this incredible ability to mobilize and inspire people across racial and socioeconomic lines.
Yeah.
It was a pivotal moment for the movement as it established this really powerful model for future protests and demonstrations.
And speaking of powerful demonstrations, the guide also highlights the Little Rock Nine,
Right.
the 9 African-American students who integrated Central High School in 1957.
Yeah.
I remember seeing images of them being escorted by soldiers, facing down like angry mobs.
Yeah.
It must have been terrifying.
Absolutely. I mean, their courage was just truly remarkable. I mean, they were teenagers,
Right.
thrust into the national spotlight, facing threats and harassment simply for trying to get an education.
Yeah.
The guide points out that the governor of Arkansas actually tried to block their entry.
Wow.
And President Eisenhower had to intervene, sending federal troops to enforce desegregation.
Wow.
It was a stark reminder of the resistance to change even after, the Brown v. Board of Education ruling.
So we see this constant like push and pull
Wow.
victories followed by fierce resistance.
Why?
What I find fascinating is that the guide mentions like this whole wave of student-led sit-ins
Oh, yeah.
that erupted in the 1960s, it seems like
Yeah.
young people really stepped up and played a key role in the movement.
Absolutely. I mean, it's important to remember that this wasn't just a movement led by adults,
Yeah.
right? Young people were on the front lines demanding change and refusing to accept the status quo.
Right.
The sit-ins were particularly effective because they were so disruptive,
Yeah.
yet peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine groups of black students dressed in their Sunday best,
Right.
politely sitting at whites-only lunch counters,
Yeah.
refusing to leave until they were served.
It's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
And the guide mentions that this tactic spread like wildfire across the South.
Absolutely, yeah.
Did those sit-ins have any lasting impact beyond just desegregating lunch counters?
They absolutely did. I mean, they forced businesses to confront the absurdity of segregation.
Right.
And they galvanized this whole new generation of activists.
Yeah.
The sit-ins also demonstrated the power of nonviolent direct action, proving that even in the face of hostility and violence, peaceful protest could bring about real change.
Right. It's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
And then we have the freedom rides,
Yeah.
which the guide describes as incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Why were these rides considered so risky, and what impact did they ultimately have?
Well, the freedom rides aimed to challenge segregation in interstate bus travel,
Okay.
which was still commonplace despite Supreme Court rulings against it.
Right.
These were interracial groups of activists
Right.
who rode buses through the South,
Yeah.
facing violence, arrests, and even fire bombings along the way.
Wow, that's intense. Did their efforts actually lead to any concrete changes in policy?
They did. I mean, the freedom rides brought the brutality of segregation into the national spotlight,
Yeah.
forcing the Kennedy administration to take action. Eventually, the Interstate Commerce Commission issued stricter regulations against segregation in interstate travel,
Right.
direct result of the Freedom Riders' sacrifices.
And of course, we can't talk about the civil rights movement without mentioning the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963.
Right.
The guide focuses on Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech.
Of course, yeah.
But what was the overall purpose of the march?
Well, I mean, it was this massive demonstration drawing over 250,000 people to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
to demand equal rights and economic opportunities for African Americans.
Yeah.
It was a powerful display of unity and determination, bringing together civil rights leaders, labor unions,
Right.
religious groups,
Yeah.
and everyday citizens from all walks of life.
It's incredible to think of that many people coming together for a common cause.
Yeah.
Like, what impact did the march ultimately have on the fight for civil rights?
Well, it played a crucial role in putting pressure on Congress
Yeah.
to pass meaningful civil rights legislation. The images of the march, broadcast nationwide, helped to galvanize public support and demonstrated the sheer scale of the movement.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems like this was like a real turning point,
Yeah.
shifting public opinion,
Yeah.
paving the way for legislative victories.
Right.
The guide mentions the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as like key outcomes of the movement.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us more about these landmark pieces of legislation?
Yeah. I mean, the Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Right.
Well, the Voting Rights Act aimed to overcome legal barriers
Yeah.
that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote.
Right.
These acts were monumental achievements.
Yeah.
But the guide emphasizes that they were just the beginning of a long and ongoing struggle for equality.
Right. The fight wasn't over, but these legislative victories felt like a major step forward.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm curious, though, about the movement's impact beyond these legal changes.
Yeah.
How did it shape the social and cultural landscape of America?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore in detail next as we delve into the lasting consequences of this extraordinary movement.
Okay.
We'll examine how it reshaped societal norms, inspired other social justice movements, and continues to influence our conversations about race and equality today.
All right. Well, that sounds like a perfect place to pick up after a quick break.
So we've covered a lot of ground, in this deep dive, tracing the civil rights movement from its roots in the Jim Crow South to those monumental legislative victories in the 1960s. Now let's shift our focus to like the movement's lasting impact, right? The guide suggests it wasn't just about legal changes, but it was a catalyst for these like profound social and cultural shifts. What are some of the key areas where we see that impact most clearly? Yeah, you're right. I mean, the impact goes far beyond just the laws themselves. I mean, we see it in things like the increased access to education, employment, and housing for African Americans.
Right. Yeah.
The guide highlights how the movement really helped to dismantle discriminatory practices in these areas, opening up opportunities that were previously denied.
So it's about more than just saying, okay, discrimination is illegal now.
Right.
It's about actually creating those tangible pathways for advancement and equality.
Yeah.
The guide also talks about like a shift in societal norms.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly does that mean? Like, did the movement really change the way people thought about race and equality?
I mean, it's hard to quantify a shift in attitudes.
Right.
But the movement undoubtedly forced America to confront its own hypocrisy
Yeah.
and grapple with the deep-seated racism
Right.
that had plagued the nation for centuries.
Yeah.
It sparked this national conversation about race and equality.
Yeah.
That continues to this day.
And that conversation feels more relevant than ever.
Absolutely.
The guide also points out that the civil rights movement served as like a blueprint for other social justice movements.
Oh, yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, the tactics of nonviolent resistance,
Yeah.
the strategic use of protests and legal challenges,
All right.
and the powerful message of equality, that really resonated with other marginalized groups
Yeah.
fighting for their own rights. We see this in the women's rights movement,
Yeah.
the LGBTQ plus rights movement,
Yeah.
the disability rights movement.
Right.
All of these movements drew inspiration and strategies from the civil rights movement.
It's like this ripple effect
Yeah.
spreading outwards and inspiring generations of activists
Right.
to fight for a more just and equitable world.
Yeah.
As we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by the immense courage and resilience of those who fought for civil rights. What lessons can we draw from their experiences, and how can we apply those lessons to the challenges we face today?
That's a powerful question,
Yeah.
and one that deserves deep reflection.
Yeah.
I think one of the key takeaways is that change rarely comes easily, right?
Right.
It requires this unwavering commitment,
Yeah.
strategic action, and a willingness to challenge the status quo,
Right.
even in the face of adversity. The civil rights movement reminds us that ordinary people
Yeah.
can achieve extraordinary things
Right.
when they come together to fight for justice.
And it underscores the importance of continuing the fight, right?
That's like
The guide emphasizes that the struggle for equality is ongoing.
Precisely, yeah. While we've made significant progress,
Yeah.
we still see echoes of the past,
Right.
present-day struggles against racism, discrimination,
Right.
and inequality. It's a reminder that the pursuit of justice is a marathon, not a sprint,
Right.
and that each generation must kind of carry the torch forward.
This has been such an insightful journey.
Yeah, it has.
The guide you shared was a fantastic starting point.
Thank you.
And for those who want to explore further, it includes a whole list of books, documentaries, and even podcasts
Oh, wow.
that delves deeper into this pivotal period in American history.
I highly encourage everyone to check those out.
Yeah.
I mean, the more we understand the past, the better equipped we are to navigate the present,
Right.
and shape a more just and equitable future.
So as we close out this deep dive,
Yeah.
I leave you with this final thought.
Yeah.
How can you be a part of positive change today? What actions, big or small, can you take to honor the legacy of the civil rights movement and create a more just world for everyone? Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.
Thanks for having me.